Your SharePoint agent didn't hallucinate a leak. You handed it a firehose and asked for a sip. Overscoped knowledge sources plus permissive inheritance equals accidental disclosure at machine speed. The fix isn't magic, it's scope discipline, permission hardening, and DLP with teeth, wrapped in a baseline policy pack you can deploy today. I'll show you how agents actually see data, why grounding doesn't isolate permissions, and the exact controls that cage them without killing usefulness. There's one setting most admins skip, an approval gate you need, and a DLP pattern that actually blocks agents. Let's start with how they see. Foundation, how SharePoint agents actually see your data. Permissions DNA. The truth? Agents don't read your intentions, they read Microsoft Graph. Think of Graph as the bloodstream. If content is accessible through your ACLs, the agent sees the oxygen. If you overscope a knowledge source, you just installed a bypass around your carefully labeled arteries. Let me translate. An agent has two big ingredients, a user persona and retrieval filters. Persona equals the identity and its permissions across SharePoint, OneDrive, and any other connected surfaces. Retrieval equals what you pointed it at, a library, a folder, a pile of files, or a few URLs. Most people confuse retrieval filters with security boundaries. They are not. Retrieval says, search here first. Permissions say you may enter. The agent obeys permissions first, retrieval second. If you remember nothing else, remember that ordering. Now, sensitivity labels and purview DLP sit on top of content like signage and guardrails. Labels classify. DLP enforces behavior when certain content is accessed or processed. The thing most people miss is simple. Grounding does not override rights. Grounding filters relevance. It doesn't shrink the agent's legal authority. So if your agent identity can see multiple adjacent libraries because you left inheritance intact, the LLM can and will stitch nearby truths into an answer. Not spooky. Predictable. Permissions inheritance is silent escalation. You swear a site is internal only, then discover a SharePoint group includes everyone or authenticated users. Guests linger, old project groups persist. The agent respects ACLs, not vibes. If that identity can open the file in SharePoint, the agent can process it unless DLP or label policy combinations explicitly block agent operations. That's why your single library pilot suddenly quoted an HR policy from a neighboring library. You didn't isolate anything. You suggested a preferred shelf in an unlocked room. Enter the least knowledge necessary model. Instead of feeding a site root and hoping relevance saves you, bind knowledge sources to specific libraries. Avoid site-level ingestion. Cap folders, use metadata filters so retrieval indexes only the documents that matter to the agent's mission. In Copilot Studio and SharePoint Agent Builders, you can designate official sources, disable general AI knowledge, and add fallback responses. That not authoritative fallback is your seatbelt. Without it, the model fills gaps with general knowledge that doesn't honor your compliance posture. Limits matter too. Platforms impose practical ceilings on files, folders, and URLs per knowledge source. Those aren't just performance notes, they're guardrails for governance. When you hit a limit, the wrong instinct is to widen the scope to a site route just for now. That's how leaks begin. The right move is to orchestrate multiple narrow agents, each with tightly scoped sources, rather than one encyclopedic bot with a buffet pass. Distribute knowledge, keep authority minimal. Let me back up and give you a mental model that won't betray you under pressure. Agent equals user persona plus retrieval filter. Permissions gate first, retrieval second. Labels describe sensitivity. DLP decides what actions are allowed when that sensitivity is present. Grounding helps the model find the right paragraph. Permissions decide if it was allowed to see the paragraph at all. DLP can still say no processing even when both of those say yes. That stack, gate, find, enforce, keeps your thinking clean. Consequences of ignoring this, data bleed that looks like AI being weird, but is actually your scope design colliding with permissive inheritance. Adjacent libraries feel nearby to the model because they are nearby in your permissions. And yes, the model will happily stitch truth across boundaries you never hardened. Once you internalize the plumbing, everything else clicks. You stop blaming the LLM for answering, and you start controlling what it's allowed to consider. Now that you see the bloodstream and the spine, graph permissions and retrieval filters, let's stop the water from crossing rooms. Scope sources like a contract, then break inheritance and label like you mean it. Control plane 1. Scope the knowledge sources like a lawyer reads contracts. Now we write scope like legal language, precise, bounded, and utterly intolerant of ambiguity. Because broad sources create crosstalk, and the LLM will happily stitch nearby truths into an answer like a gossip columnist with a long lens. Here's the scope rule that separates adults from interns. Library-level sources only. Not sites, not everything under this hub. A single document library per declared purpose. If the agent exists to answer product FAQs, it gets the product FAQ library and nothing else. The truth? Every extra inch of scope becomes latent risk the model can activate in milliseconds. Compare that to the average user's approach. Point at the site root, add and subfolders, and hope metadata saves them. It won't. Retrieval filters guide search. They don't erect a firewall. So you structure scope the way a lawyer structures clauses, specific, exclusive, and testable. Practical scoping mechanics you'll actually use. Avoid side routes. Always specify a concrete library path. Cap folder depth. If you must use folders, freeze it at a shallow level with no recursive grab bag. Enforce metadata filters. Only ingest items where status x approved, version equal published, department equal x. No metadata, no ingestion. Exclude drafts, archives, and working subtrees. If you can't exclude them, move them out. Yes, refactor, that's called governance. Limits reality check. Platforms are not infinite buffers. You've got file counts, folder caps, and URL quotas. Treat them like speed limits that keep the wheels on. In Copilot Studio and SharePoint agent builders, test your practical ceilings before go live. Create a pilot source with the real distribution. A few hundred approved PDFs, some docx playbooks, a dozen PPTs. If ingestion slows, times out, or starts helpfully skipping, you don't expand scope, you split scope. One domain per source, one source per agent persona. This is orchestration, not gluttony. The shortcut nobody teaches. Multiple narrow agents beat one encyclopedic monster every time. Build an HR policy agent, a benefits agent, a travel agent, each with their own tight library and enforced filters. Then if you need a single entry point, orchestrate at the front door with a router agent that hands queries to the right specialist. Pros do this because it scales governance. Beginners cram 200 mixed domain files into one agent and wonder why answers sound like a committee meeting. Disable general AI knowledge for regulated agents. If the agent is authoritative for a domain, it should be silent outside that domain. That's where fallback answers matter. Configure a clear, humble response. I'm not authoritative for that. Here are the approved sources I cover. The second you let general knowledge fill gaps, you're back to unverifiable trivia that ignores your labels and DLP intent. Curation matters. Designate official sources. That means an approval workflow upstream of ingestion. Only add content that's past review, accuracy, freshness, and sensitivity labeling confirmed. If you can't prove a document's lineage, it doesn't belong in an agent's mouth. The model is confident, not correct. Your curation is the break. Common mistakes you will stop making today. Dumping mixed domains into a single source. Policies, tech docs, vendor contracts in one heap. Split them by purpose, letting agents crawl arbitrary web URLs. No, external URLs expand the blast radius and kneecap auditability. Ingesting drafts and chatter files, the model can't tell half-baked from published unless you enforce metadata and locations that separate them. Assuming hidden means protected. Hidden is a UI choice. Permissions are the law. Testing discipline, because yes, you actually test scope. Query the edge cases, ask the agent authoritative questions it should answer cold, then bait it with adjacent topics it must decline. If it answers out of domain, your scope or fallback is wrong. If it refuses in domain, your filters or approvals are too tight. Tuning is subtraction, not addition. Remove irrelevant paths, reduce metadata ambiguity, and keep slicing until the answers are boringly predictable. And metrics. You'll track. Answerability, percentage of in-domain queries resolved with citations to the intended library. Containment, percentage of answers citing only approved sources. Silence quality, clarity and frequency of the fallback when asked out of domain. If you want a mental checkbox before we move on, library only, shallow folders, strict metadata, approved only, no general knowledge, multiple narrow agents, tested limits, measured outcomes. Once you lock this, everything downstream, permissions, labels, DLP works with you instead of fighting your overscoped mess. Now we harden inheritance so the room itself is locked, not just the filing cabinet. Control plane 2, break inheritance and label like you mean it. Scoped knowledge is useless if the doors are wide open. In SharePoint, inherited permissions are the hand-me-down sweaters of security, ill-fitting, full of holes, and mysteriously good enough until the cold wind hits. Agents respect ACLs, not optimism. So we stop inheritance where it matters, we assign unique permissions, and we excise the broad groups that quietly turn internal into internet adjacent. Start with the uncomfortable audit. Pull your sensitive libraries into 3 buckets. Must isolate, can share, and unknown. Unknown is a red flag. If you can't explain who has access in one sentence, it belongs in must isolate until proven otherwise. Then, for each must isolate library, break permission inheritance. Not at the site, at the library holding the crown jewels. Breaking inheritance is not drama, it's adulthood. You aim for explicit minimum membership, a small owners group, a defined members group, and readers only where business requires. Now purge the lazy mechanics. Broad groups like everyone except external users, and authenticated users hide inside SharePoint groups like Matryoshka dolls. Pull them out. Replace them with Azure AD security groups mapped to roles you actually manage. Guests should be exceptional, temporary, and discoverable, never nested in a SharePoint group that was created during a project kickoff 3 years ago. If the word all appears in the group name, your agent will treat it like a buffet. Standardize permission tiers so you can reason about them. Tier A, confidential libraries, owners, members, small, readers, none or narrow, no guests. Tier B, internal-only libraries, owners, members, managed, readers, department group, no external. Tier C, public internal libraries, owners, members, readers, all employees, still no guests. The model is simple because it needs to be enforced by humans who get distracted. Agents will execute whatever you encode. Encode sanity. Enter sensitivity labels. Labels are not stickers, they're policy keys. You map confidential, restricted, public, and so on to behaviors. The trap most admins fall into is letting labels be decorative. We're done with that. You align labels with purview DLP, so the label means something machines can enforce. For example, confidential HR triggers a DLP policy that blocks agent processing actions even when a user can view the file. Yes, you heard that correctly. The user can read it in SharePoint, but the agent gets a no at the processing layer. That's the game changer. Labels plus DLP decouple human visibility from machine automation. Let's make that concrete. You've got an HR policies library labeled confidential HR. An HR agent needs to answer questions from that library. Good. That agent's identity is granted read access to that specific library. Adjacent libraries like HR working drafts are isolated with unique permissions the agent identity doesn't have. Meanwhile, your DLP policy says if label equals confidential, HR and access attempt equals agent processing, only allow if agent is in approved agent's HR. Every other agent, including your enthusiastic company knowledge generalist, gets blocked. This is how you stop crosstalk even when someone forgets and gives the wrong agent a look. What about users who can see too much? That's the silent escalation. If you rely only on user visibility, then any agent acting on behalf of the user inherits the sprawl. So keep the agent identity narrow. Don't build agents that run as whoever invokes me. Build them to run as a service identity with least privilege. Pair that with labels and DLP so even privileged users can't trick an agent into processing out-of-bounds data. You're layering defenses like a sane adult, not praying to the settings page. Common mistakes that ruin this layer. Assuming hidden equals secure. Leaving project sites with default inheritance. Letting guest access persist after the vendor is gone. And worst, stuffing broad M365 groups into Reader because it was easier. It's easier right up until your agent stitches a quote from legal into a sales answer. Then it's incident response theater. Implementation rhythm you can repeat. Isolate the library, replace broad groups with role groups, assign a service identity to the agent, apply sensitivity labels at the file and library level, and bind DLP policies to labels with explicit agent allow conditions. Test with a controlled query set, in-domain allowed, adjacent denied, labeled but unapproved agent blocked with a clear message. If any answer escapes, permissions are wrong. If the agent processes labeled content without being approved, your DLP mapping is wrong. Fix the mapping, not the story you tell yourself. One more nuance. Inheritance at the site can remain for the mundane stuff. We're not performing open heart surgery on the cafeteria menu. Reserve unique permissions for the libraries that feed agents. That keeps your admin workload sane while hardening the exact surfaces automation will hit. Break inheritance. Use unique minimal groups. Label like the label controls money because leaks cost money. Then wire labels to DLP so agents follow rules even when humans forget. Now the room is locked, not just the filing cabinet. Control plane 3, approval gates, PG licensing boundaries, and data policies. You've scoped sources and killed lazy inheritance. Good. Now gate the front door so random enthusiasts don't spin up shadow agents with helpful access. If anyone can create an agent, governance becomes crowdsourced chaos. The fix is boring and effective. Approvals, licensing boundaries, and data policies that act like seatbelts you can't unbuckle mid-drive. Start with an approval workflow for agent creation. No free for all. New agent requests go to designated approvers. Think security compliance and a business owner who actually understands the domain. You enforce naming conventions, a declared purpose statement, a documented owner, a support contact, and an expiration date. No owner, no approval. No purpose, no approval. If this sounds pedantic, congratulations, you're finally doing governance. Standardize the application form. Require, target audience, business capability served, exact knowledge sources with URLs down to library level, label expectations, fallback behavior, not authoritative outside scope, and the service identity to be used. Force them to pick from pre-approved templates, HR Q&A, policy browser, ITKB, and so on, so you inherit constrained defaults instead of improvisation. Now, licensing boundaries. You will choose one of two paths, user-based Microsoft 365 Copilot or SharePoint pay-as-you-go. The truth? Licensing is not a budget line, it's a control surface. With user-based Copilot, only licensed users can use agent features, which naturally limits sprawl. With PayG, you enable consumption at the tenant or environment level and centralized billing, which is flexible and If you're careless, an open bar, so you put fences around it. Separate environments for pilot and production, PagerDuty enabled only where finance can see the meter. Cost alerts tuned so a runaway pilot doesn't turn into a poetry slam for your cloud bill. Approval policy must capture licensing choice. If it's PagerDuty, require a cost center, an owner who signs for charges, and an estimated usage profile. If it's user-based, require a roster of licensed users and a plan for offboarding. You're not being difficult, you're preventing the "we didn't know it was on" incident. Data policies come next, the rules that keep agents from slurping from prohibited connectors like they're at a smoothie bar. Use Power Platform tenant-level data policies to restrict which connectors are allowed in the same data group as SharePoint. Regulated agents live in a restricted group with only Microsoft 365 and approved internal APIs. No random web, no consumer services, no shadow SaaS. If an integration is required, it goes through review, gets an enterprise connector, and lands in the allowed list. Yes, that takes time. That's called not violating policy. Pair those data policies with Purview. Use Purview to define data boundaries, locations where sensitive labeled content lives, exfil paths that are simply not allowed, and monitoring that flags attempts to bridge groups. You're building lanes and rumble strips. The agent can drive quickly inside the lane. It cannot hop medians into the oncoming traffic of public endpoints. Implement agent templates with pre-approved sources. This is the part everyone skips and then regrets. Templates bake in, disable general knowledge, the not authoritative fallback, library-level sources, required metadata filters, and the correct service identity. Approvers see HR policy template and know it ships with the right defaults. Makers fill in the blanks. They don't reinvent the wheel with square edges. Common mistakes to stop. Letting pilots spawn in unmanaged sites just for testing, enabling PagerDuty without tagging costs or alerts, and granting maker roles to anyone with a pulse. Also, never allow agents to default to use general knowledge if not found. That's how you get confident nonsense wrapped in plausible citations. Final rhythm, request via template, review by security/compliance, owner trio, choose licensing with cost controls, bind to the restricted data group, confirm purview boundaries, approve with expiration, and schedule a 90-day renewal. No renewal, auto-disable. Agents are not immortal, neither are their use cases. Control plane 4, DLP that actually stops agents, purview patterns that bite. Without real-time enforcement, agents are just high-speed data couriers. You need breaks. Enter purview DLP patterns that don't just wag a finger, they block, alert, and leave a paper trail your auditor can love. Why this matters: agents process content, not just view it. Viewing can be permissible for a human. Automated processing is a different risk class. The fix is to bind sensitivity and pattern detection to explicit action blocks for agent contexts. Here's the spine. Build policies that target SharePoint locations feeding agents, match on sensitivity labels and sensitive info types, and set actions to block agent processing, sharing, or downloading when confidence hits your threshold. Yes, confidence thresholds. Stop treating them like decor. For noisy patterns, like generic PII, raise confidence and require multiple evidence hits. For crown jewels, trade secrets, exact data match of employee IDs, use high severity with immediate block. Patterns that bite. Sensitivity labels mapped to agent block unless allow listed. Sensitive info types, financial IDs, government identifiers, health terms, tuned with higher confidence. Exact data match, EDM, for your real identifiers, employee numbers, customer IDs, so false positives don't drown you. Keyword dictionaries for proprietary project code names. Low volume, high signal, actions that matter. Block with override disabled for agents. Humans may justify, agents do not. Machines don't have business context, they have triggers. Quarantine or restrict download when triggered by agent workflows. If the agent can't fetch the file, it can't hallucinate from it. Alert to SecOps with rich context, site, library, label, triggering pattern, calling agent identity. Noise reduction so people don't root around controls. Start in simulation mode in non-production sites. Tune thresholds until alerts reflect reality, not fantasy. Scope tightly to agent libraries first. Expand only after signal is clean. Use combined conditions, label per sensitive info type, 2 locks, 1 door. User messaging is not a nicety. It's the difference between compliance and side channels. Write clear error text. This agent is not authorized to process confidential HR content. Ask the HR agent or request access via process. You're giving them the right door, not a brick wall. If you just say blocked, they'll paste data into Teams. That's your fault. Common mistakes. Scoping DLP to Exchange and Teams because SharePoint policies were noisy. They were noisy because you didn't tune them. Also excluding SharePoint for performance. Performance of what? Your next incident response? Finally, relying only on generic PI types while ignoring EDM. You own the exact identifiers. Use them. The litmus test. An out-of-scope agent attempts to answer a question that requires a confidential labeled file. Result should be an immediate block, an instructive message, and a high-severity alert in your pipeline. If instead you get a confident answer, your DLP is decorative. Make it teeth, not signage.